All right, and we're back. We're on our next slide. We are going to talk now about our second group of sexually addicted persons, so to speak, who've been studied by researchers who are interested in this very controversial topic, and they are female survivors of sexual abuse, female abuse survivors. So, studies have suggested high rates of sexual abuse reported by females who have self-identified, this is important, self-identified as sexual addicts, and those who present with out-of-control sexual behavior as determined by that criteria that I mentioned in the previous lecture, even though it hasn't officially been adopted in the clinical nomenclature. These are women who engage in out-of-control sexual behavior despite problematic or adverse consequences. And this group of women typically present with what we refer to as adult attachment disorders. So you may remember in the previous lecture, I talked a little bit about that, right? So there's a large body of research in the field of psychology on attachment, and this typically starts in childhood. And those who study it argue that our childhood attachment with our parents or our parental figures or our caregivers really influence our representation of relationships. Our representation of our own part in those relationships, what a healthy relationship is, and even whether or not we are secure in our adulthood romantic relationships. So these women, research indicates, present with adult attachment disorders where something has happened in their childhood, and typically that is sexual abuse, that has interrupted their representation of what a normal, healthy, consensual relationship is. They tend to present with vulnerability to stress, so they're very easily finding themselves very easily stressed out by ordinary life circumstances and dysregulated by it. They have an inability to tolerate the demands of intimacy. So what does that mean? Think about intimacy with a partner. If you've had one or you have one, or even if you haven't, but you have a sense of what that means, or you have other people in your life who've experienced it. Intimacy requires a lot of things of people, some of which can be uncomfortable if you don't have a strong sense of self and if you aren't secure in yourself and loving others or getting love from others, right? Intimacy means you have to be vulnerable. You have to be open. You have to let somebody else into your personal space. And you have to be able to tolerate any insecurities you might have about letting someone get that close to you. These women have very difficult time with any circumstance in which they have to be vulnerable to a partner. They also experience emotional dysregulation in some form. They might have labile mood. You guys are experts on what that means by now, right? Labile mood, mood lability. What does that mean? It means your mood shifts frequently, right? You could be up one minute and down the next minute. You could be happy. You could be sad. You could be irritable. You have a lot of shifting in your mood state, a lack of mood stability. They also tend to suffer from anxiety or depressive disorder, so prone to the negative affect or negative affective disorders that we've talked about in this class. It has been hypothesized by researchers who study this group of women that they have turned to compulsive sexual behavior as a way of self-medicating uncomfortable emotional states. They're trying to fix or soothe their depression, their anxiety, their unstable or labile mood state. And they do that while engaging in more of a fantasy sexual life rather than actual intimacy with a partner that is much more threatening given their abuse history and their negative affective situation. Particularly, the studies indicate these women tend to take on masochistic roles. And it's hypothesized this is because they've been sexually abused. So because of the abuse, they see themselves as worthy of harm, as worthy of abuse, as worthy of being treated like they're not worthy of respect. A masochist is somebody who is sexually aroused by being humiliated, by being physically harmed, or all of that. Masochism is a disorder in the DSM, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later when we talk about paraphilic sexual addiction. Masochism is a diagnosable disorder in the DSM, and women who are female abuse survivors and engage in sexually compulsive behavior tend to take on the masochistic role in these compulsive sexual actions with multiple partners. And it is argued this is because of their abuse history that they view themselves as somebody who is worthy of being dominated, harmed, and treated disrespectfully. Women who engage in compulsive cybersex have also comprised this category. They often report sexual fantasies in which they repeat or recreate aspects of their earlier life traumas. So remember what cybersex is. This is kind of a catch-all category for online sexual activity associated with using the internet. It can mean viewing more passively explicit or pornographic images or websites. It could mean actually more actively exposing one's own sexual life or sexual details, or uploading images or written items or descriptions of one's own sexual behavior. It could mean interacting with paid sex workers on websites. It could mean interacting with multiple anonymous partners through internet chat rooms or sexual messages. Meeting potential partners online for offline engagement in sexual activity. Anything like that counts as, quote, cybersex. Some of the studies on this group of women indicate that when they do engage in cybersex in any number of these forms, they are trying to recreate aspects of their actual abuse history. So if somebody, for example, tied them up, they're seeking out partners or disclosing fantasies about being tied up, things of that nature. So the argument is that these women are engaging in what we call sexually addictive or compulsive sexual behavior as a means of somehow dealing with their sexually abusive history that they haven't been able to properly manage or treat. So think about that before we move on to the next category. I'll catch you on the next slide.